Hi, I'm Brian Durham, and we're going to talk about the founder of Rex Manufacturing, Mr. Charles C. Hall. C.C. Hall was born on a farm near Alquina in 1866, did not like the farm life, moves away to go to college, and by 1885 is a school teacher. He does that for 2 years. While working at a hardware store here in town. He later buys that hardware store from a guy named O.P. Griffith, who dies in 1891. And he works that job for a few years when he is recruited to go to Perry Manufacturing in Indianapolis, which was the largest buggy manufacturer in the country at that time. Now, interestingly enough, Mr. Griffith happened to be David Perry's brother-in-law. Now, David Perry was born in Pennsylvania, and his family moved to Laurel, Indiana, and then later in 1873, he himself opens up a hardware store here in Connersville when he was 21 years old, and was not successful in that business, ends up filing bankruptcy. He later buys a buggy company in Rushville and moves that to Indianapolis, where he buys a 100-acre farm in what's now Crown Hill Cemetery. C.C. Hall gets recruited by Colonel James Roberts and Herman Monk, who owned the Monk and Roberts Furniture Company in 1898, and they're getting out of the furniture business. So in November of 1898, Rex Manufacturing is established with C.C. Hall as the president of the company. He remains at that role until 1940, so he outlived really everybody who helped start Rex Manufacturing. He, a few years later, ends up starting Rex Shield Company. So they start making tops and shields for cars, because at that time, cars were not enclosed, and enclosure was an aftermarket product, and Rex specialized in that aftermarket product. The Depression was not kind to Rex Manufacturing. By that time, they had gotten almost completely out of the auto industry. More and more cars were being built enclosed. So they decided to diversify and got into the refrigeration business. So they sold refrigerators, either electric or ice chests, that were manufactured here in town. And that was in 1926 is when they really got into the refrigeration aspect of the business. And by the late 1930s, things were not good. There was 3 large strikes at Rex Manufacturing, and the board of directors kind of forced C.C. Hall out of his role. And in October of 1940, the board of directors at Rex Manufacturing decided to hire a guy named Sammy Rigenstreif, who was an accountant in Indianapolis, to come save Rex. Interestingly enough, they did not pay Mr. Rigenstreif. They offered him stock in the company so that the success was tied to how much money he could potentially earn. So Sammy takes over in 1940, and the start of World War II, or America's role in World War II, helps land 80 or more contracts, government contracts for Rex Manufacturing, really turning the business around. And at the end of the war, they come back and they start manufacturing refrigerators. Some 500,000 refrigerators were manufactured after the end of World War II. In 1947, Philco ends up buying Rex Manufacturing, and Sam cashes in on his stock options that he had there, and later buys American Kitchens, which he turns into design and manufacturing, and lasts until the late 1980s here in Connersville. But C.C. Hall's quite an interesting character, much like a lot of the early industrialists here in Connersville. He took a lot of risk. He was not afraid to lose everything that he had. In fact, he did at least once on the hardware business, ended up losing a lot of money, was into taking risk, and luckily for Mr. Hall, the carriage business panned out. He and his friends at that time, really, he worked it well, and quite honestly, he happened to outlive everybody, living until 1957, where he dies in Indianapolis. It kind of worked out for the better for Mr. Hall. to outlive them, but he really transitions. If there were a transitional figure in manufacturing in Connersville, C.C. Hall would kind of be that manufacturing transitional figure from the old buggy days in the late 1800s to the Philco days in the 1950s, 60s, and really all the way to Visteon. So we can thank C.C. Hall and his group for starting Rex Manufacturing that leads to Visteon, Ford, whatever you want to call it, that lasts here in Connersville until 2007. So it's a guy with an idea who took a risk with some guys who had some money, and we end up with, you know, countless stories and countless connections between Rex and Philco and Ford, all the way back to the carriage industry.